France is known to have an arsenal of weapons of mass destruction. France is one of the 5 nuclear weapons states under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but is not known to possess or develop any chemical or biological weapons. France was the 4th country to test an independently developed nuclear weapon in 1960, under the government of Charles de Gaulle. The French military is currently thought to retain a weapons stockpile of around 300 operational nuclear warheads, making it the 3rd largest in the world. Speaking in terms of warheads, not megatons, the weapons are part of the national force de frappe, developed in the late 1950s and 1960s to give France the ability to distance itself from NATO while having a means of nuclear deterrence under sovereign control. France did not sign the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which gave it the option to conduct further nuclear tests until it signed and ratified the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1996 and 1998, respectively. France denies currently having chemical weapons, ratified the Chemical Weapons Convention in 1995, and acceded to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention in 1984. France had also ratified the Geneva Protocol in 1926. History. France was one of the nuclear pioneers, going back to the work of Marie Sklodowska-Curie. Curie's last assistant Bertrand Goldschmidt became the father of the French bomb. French professor Frédéric Joliot-Curie, High Commissioner for Atomic Energy, was approached previous to President Roosevelt creating the Briggs Advisory Committee on Uranium in 1939 about the possibilities of creating an atomic bomb. Joliot-Curie told the New York Herald-Tribune that the report on atomic energy for military purposes in 1945 wrongfully omitted the contributions of French scientists. After WW II, France's former position of leadership suffered greatly because of the instability of the Fourth Republic, and the lack of finance available. During the Second World War, Goldschmidt invented the now standard method for extracting plutonium while working as part of the British-Canadian team participating in the Manhattan Project. But after the liberation in 1945, France had to start its own program almost from scratch. Nevertheless, the first French reactor went critical in 1948 and small amounts of plutonium were extracted in 1949. There was no formal commitment to a nuclear weapons program at the time, although plans were made to build reactors for the large-scale production of plutonium. However, in the 1950s a civilian nuclear research program was started, a byproduct of which would be plutonium. In 1956 a secret committee for the military applications of atomic energy was formed, and a development program for delivery vehicles was started. The intervention of the United States in the Suez Crisis that year is credited with convincing France that it needed to accelerate its own nuclear weapons program to remain a global power. In 1957, soon after Suez and the resulting diplomatic tension with both the USSR and the United States, French President René Coty decided on the creation of the CSEM in the then French Sahara, a new nuclear tests facility replacing the CIES. With the return of Charles de Gaulle to the presidency of France in the midst of the May 1958 crisis, the final decisions to build an atomic bomb were taken, and a successful test took place in 1960. Since then France has developed and maintained its own nuclear deterrent, one intended to defend France even if the United States refused to risk its own cities by assisting Western Europe in a nuclear war. In 1986 Francis Perrin, French High Commissioner for Atomic Energy from 1951 to 1970, stated that in 1949 Israeli scientists were first invited to the Saclay Nuclear Research Center. This cooperation leading to a joint effort including sharing of knowledge between French and Israeli scientists, especially those with knowledge from the Manhattan Project. In 1956, as part of their military alliance during the Suez Crisis, the French agreed to secretly build the Diamond, a nuclear reactor in Israel, and soon after agreed to construct a reprocessing plant for the extraction of plutonium at the site. By 1960, 2 years into the administration of Charles de Gaulle, cooperation cooled following a successful test with the French asking that Israel cease its weapons program and submit to international inspections, lest a proliferation scandal affect French foreign relations. According to Lieutenant Colonel Warner D. Farr in a report to the USAF Counter-Proliferation Center, while France was previously a leader in nuclear research, Israel and France were at a similar level of expertise after the war, and Israeli scientists could make significant contributions to the French effort. Progress in nuclear science and technology in France and Israel remained closely linked throughout the early 50s. Israeli scientists probably helped construct the G1 plutonium production reactor and UP-1 reprocessing plant at Marcoule. In 1957, Euratom was created, and under cover of the peaceful use of nuclear power, the French signed deals with Germany and Italy to work together on nuclear weapons development. The West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer told his cabinet that he wanted to achieve, through Euratom, as quickly as possible, the chance of producing our own nuclear weapons. The idea was short-lived. In 1958, de Gaulle became president and Germany and Italy were excluded. France developed its nuclear and thermonuclear bombs without outside assistance. The United States, however, began providing technical assistance in the early 1970s through the 1980s. The aid was secret, unlike the relationship with the British nuclear program. The Nixon administration, unlike previous presidencies, did not oppose its allies' possession of atomic weapons and believed that the Soviets would find having multiple nuclear-armed Western opponents more difficult, because the Atomic Energy Act of 1946 prohibited sharing information on nuclear weapon design. A method known as negative guidance, or 20 questions, was used. French scientists described to their American counterparts their research, and were told whether they were correct. Areas in which the French received help included MIRV, radiation hardening, missile design, intelligence on Soviet anti-missile defenses, and advanced computer technology. Because the French program attracted the best brains of the nation, the Americans benefited from French research as well. The relationship also improved the two nations' military ties, despite its departure from NATO's command structure in 1966. France developed two separate nuclear targeting plans, one, national, for the force-de-frappe's role as a solely French deterrent, and one coordinated with NATO. France is understood to have tested neutron or enhanced radiation bombs in the past, apparently leading the field with an early test of the technology in 1967 and an actual neutron bomb in 1980. Testing. There were 210 French nuclear tests from 1960 through 1995. 17 of them were done in the Algerian Sahara between 1960 and 1966, starting in the middle of the Algerian War. 193 were carried out in French Polynesia. A summary table of French nuclear testing by years can be found here. France's nuclear testing series. Saharan experiments centers after studying Reactor Union, New Caledonia, and Clipperton Island. General Charles A. Lauret, head of the Special Weapons Section, proposed two possible nuclear test sites for France in a January 1957 report: French Algeria in the Sahara Desert, and French Polynesia, although he recommended against Polynesia because of its distance from France and lack of a large airport. Aylaret stated that Algeria should be chosen provisionally, likely due in part to the Algerian War. A series of atmospheric nuclear tests was conducted by the Centre Saharienne d'Experimentations Militaires from February 1960 until April 1961. The first, called Jerbois Blue, took place on 13 February 1960 in Algeria. The explosion took place at 40 kilometers from the military base at Hamoudia near Regana, which is the last town on the Tanis rough track heading south across the Sahara to Mali, and 700 kilometers (435 miles) south of Betcha. The device had a 70 kiloton yield. Although Algeria became independent in 1962, France was able to continue with underground nuclear tests in Algeria through 1966. The General Pierre-Marie Gallois was named Le Père de la Bombe. 3 further atmospheric tests were carried out from 1 April 1960 to 25 April 1961 at Hamoudia. Military, workers and the nomadic Tuareg population of the region were present at the test sites, without any significant protection. At most, some took a shower after each test, according to Humanité. Jerbois Rouge, the third atomic bomb, half as powerful as Hiroshima, exploded on 27 December 1960, provoking protests from Japan, USSR, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria and Ghana. After the independence of Algeria on 5 July 1962, and following the 19th March 1962 Evian agreements, the French military moved the test site to another location in the Algerian Sahara, around 150 kilometers north of Tamanrasset, near the village of Inika. Underground nuclear explosion testing was performed in drifts in the Taurat Tanafela mountain, one of the Granite Hogger mountains. The Evian agreements included a secret article which stated that Algeria concede to France the use of certain air bases, terrains, sites and military installations which are necessary to it during 5 years. The CSEM was therefore replaced by the Centre d'Experimentations Militaires des Oasis underground nuclear testing facility. A total of 13 underground nuclear tests were carried out at the Inika site from 7 November 1961 to 16 February 1966. By July 1, 1967, all French facilities were evacuated. An accident happened on May 1, 1962, during the Beryl test, 4 times more powerful than Hiroshima and designed as an underground shaft test. Due to improper sealing of the shaft, radioactive rock and dust were released into the atmosphere. 9 soldiers of the 621st Group d'Armes Spéciales unit were heavily contaminated by radiation. The soldiers were exposed to as much as 600 millisieverts. The Minister of Armed Forces, Pierre Mesmer, and the Minister of Research, Gaston Palevsky, were present. As many as 100 additional personnel, including officials, soldiers and Algerian workers, were exposed to lower levels of radiation, estimated at about 50 millisieverts, when the radioactive cloud produced by the blast passed over the command post. Due to an unexpected change in wind direction, they escaped as they could, often without wearing any protection. Palevsky died in 1984 of leukemia, which he always attributed to the Beryl incident. In 2006, Bruno Baralot, specialist of nuclear tests, measured on the site 93 microsieverts by hour of gamma ray, equivalent to 1% of the official admissible yearly dose. The incident was documented in the 2006 docudrama Vive la Bombe. Saharan facilities C.I.E.S. Hamagwai, 120 kilometers, 75 miles southwest of Kilombetcha, Algeria, used for launching rockets from 1947 to 1967. c. Sem, Regina, west of Insala, Tanis Ruft, Algeria, used for atmospheric tests from 1960 to 1961. c. Emo, in Eka, in the Hoggar, 150 kilometers, 93 miles from Tamanrasset, Tanafella, Algeria, used for underground tests from 1961 to 1967. Pacific Experiments Center. Despite its initial choice of Algeria for nuclear tests, the French government decided to build FAAA International Airport in Tahiti, spending much more money and resources than would be justified by the official explanation of tourism. By 1958, 2 years before the first Sahara test, France began again its search for new testing sites due to potential political problems with Algeria and the possibility of a ban on above-ground tests. Many overseas France islands were studied, as well as performing underground tests in the Alps, Pyrenees, or Corsica. However, engineers found problems with most of the possible sites in metropolitan France. By 1962, France hoped in its negotiations with the Algerian independence movement to retain the Sahara as a test site until 1968, but decided that it needed to be able to also perform above-ground tests of hydrogen bombs, which could not be done in Algeria. Mururoa and Fangat Alpha in French Polynesia were chosen that year. President Charles de Gaulle announced the choice on 3 January 1963, describing it as a benefit to Polynesia's weak economy. The Polynesian people and leaders broadly supported the choice, although the tests became controversial after they began, especially among Polynesian separatists. A total of 193 nuclear tests were carried out in Polynesia from 1966 to 1996. On 24 August 1968, France detonated its first thermonuclear weapon, codenamed Canopus, over Fangat Alpha. A fission device ignited a lithium-6 deuteride secondary inside a jacket of highly enriched uranium to create a 2.6 megaton blast simulation program. More recently, France has used supercomputers to simulate in-study nuclear explosions. Current nuclear doctrine and strategy. French law requires at least 1 out of 4 nuclear submarines to be on patrol in the Atlantic Ocean at any given time, like the UK's policy. In 2006, French President Jacques Chirac noted that France would be willing to use nuclear weapons against a state attacking France by terrorism. He noted that the French nuclear forces had been configured for this option. On 21 March 2008, President Nicolas Sarkozy announced that France will reduce its aircraft deliverable nuclear weapons stockpile by 1/3 and bring the total French nuclear arsenal to fewer than 300 warheads. Anti-nuclear test protests. By 1968, only France and China were detonating nuclear weapons in the open air, and the contamination caused by the H-bomb blast led to a global protest movement against further French atmospheric tests. From the early 1960s, New Zealand peace group CND and the peace media had been organizing nationwide anti-nuclear campaigns in protest of atmospheric testing in French Polynesia. These included 2 large national petitions presented to the New Zealand government, which led to a joint New Zealand and Australian government action to take France to the International Court of Justice. In 1972, Greenpeace and an amalgam of New Zealand peace groups managed to delay nuclear tests by several weeks by trespassing with a ship in the testing zone. During the time, the skipper, David McTaggart, was beaten and severely injured by members of the French military. In 1973, the New Zealand peace media organized an international flotilla of protest yachts including the Fry, Spirit of Peace, Boy Roll, Magic Island and the Tanmuir to sail into the test exclusion zone. In 1973, New Zealand Prime Minister Norman Kirk, as a symbolic act of protest, sent two Navy frigates, HMNZS Canterbury and HMNZS Otago, to Moruara. They were accompanied by HMAS Supply, a fleet oiler of the Royal Australian Navy. In 1985, the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior was bombed and sunk by the French DGSE in Auckland, New Zealand, as it prepared for another protest of nuclear testing in French military zones. One crew member, Fernando Pereira of Portugal, photographer, drowned on the sinking ship while attempting to recover his photographic equipment. Two members of DGSE were captured and sentenced, but eventually repatriated to France in a controversial affair. French President Jacques Chirac's decision to run a nuclear test series at Moruara in 1995, just 1 year before the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty was to be signed, caused worldwide protest, including an embargo of French wine. These tests were meant to provide the nation with enough data to improve further nuclear technology without needing additional series of tests. The French military conducted almost 200 nuclear tests at Moruara and Fang at Alpha atolls over a 30-year period ending 1996, 46 of them atmospheric, of which 5 were without significant nuclear yield. In August 2006, an official French government report by INSERM confirmed the link between an increase in the cases of thyroid cancer and France's atmospheric nuclear tests in the territory since 1966. Veterans Associations and Symposium, an association gathering veterans of nuclear tests, was created in 2001. Along with the Polynesian NGO Moruara Itatu, the AVAN announced on 27 November 2002 that it would depose a complaint against X for involuntary homicide and putting someone's life in danger. On 7 June 2003, for the first time, the Military Court of Tours granted an invalidity pension to a veteran of the Sahara tests. According to a poll made by the AVAN with its members, only 12% have declared being in good health. An international symposium on the consequences of tests carried out in Algeria took place on 13 and 14 February 2007, under the official oversight of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. 150,000 civilians, without taking into account the local population, are estimated to have been on the location of nuclear tests in Algeria or in French Polynesia. One French veteran of the 1960s nuclear tests in Algeria described being given no protective clothing or masks. While being ordered to witness the tests at so close a range that the flash penetrated through the arm he used to cover his eyes. One of several veterans groups claiming to organize those suffering ill effects, AVAN had 4,500 members in early 2009. Test victims' compensation. In both Algeria and French Polynesia there have been long-standing demands for compensation from those who claim injury from France's nuclear testing program. The government of France had consistently denied, since the late 1960s, that injury to military personnel and civilians had been caused by their nuclear testing. Several French veterans and African and Polynesian campaign groups have waged court cases and public relations struggles demanding government reparations. In May 2009, a group of 12 French veterans, in the campaign group Truth and Justice, who claim to have suffered health effects from nuclear testing in the 1960s, had their claims denied by the Government Commission for the Indemnification of Victims of Penal Infraction, and again by a Paris appeals court, citing laws which set a statute of limitations for damages to 1976. Following this rejection, the government announced it would create a €10 compensation fund for military and civilian victims of its testing program, both those carried out in the 1960s and the Polynesian tests of 1990 to 1996. Defense Minister Hervé Morin said the government would create a board of physicians, overseen by a French judge-magistrate, to determine if individual cases were caused by French testing, and if individuals were suffering from illnesses, on a United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation list of 18 disorders linked to exposure to testing. Pressure groups, including the veterans group Truth and Justice, criticized the program as too restrictive in illnesses covered and too bureaucratic. Polynesian groups said the bill would also unduly restrict applicants to those who had been in small areas near the test zones, not taking into account the pervasive pollution and radiation. Algerian groups had also complained that these restrictions would deny compensation to many victims. One Algerian group estimated there were 27,000 still living victims of ill effects from the 1960–66 testing there, while the French government had given an estimate of just 500.